Imagine a millionaire so desperate to find true love, he trades his life of luxury for a humble disguise. But what happens when secrets unravel and the woman he's falling for discovers the truth? Will love conquer deception, or will his lies cost him everything? Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Liam Kingsley stood near the grand window of his Manhattan penthouse, staring blankly at the sprawling city below. The glimmering skyline, usually a symbol of his success, now felt cold, mocking even. Behind him, the room was steeped in silence, broken only by the faint echo of voices that had shattered his composure just hours earlier. He clenched his fists, the memory fresh and biting. He had come home early from a gala, hoping to surprise Emma, his girlfriend of 2 years. But instead, it was Liam who had been caught off guard, walking into his own living room to find her in intimate conversation with another man. The way her hand lingered on the man's arm, her hushed laughter, the unmistakable look in her eyes, it had been enough to ignite a storm of betrayal inside him. "What's this?" Liam had asked, his voice low but trembling with disbelief. Emma hadn't even flinched. Instead, she had turned to him with an almost exasperated sigh, her perfectly manicured nails brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Oh, Liam," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "You're overreacting. It's not what you think." The other man had quickly made his exit, mumbling an awkward apology as he slipped past Liam, but the damage was done. Liam had stared at her, waiting, hoping for some explanation, some denial that could undo the scene seared into his mind. But Emma had only crossed her arms, her expression shifting from mild annoyance to something sharper, crueler. "Honestly, Liam," Emma said, her voice sharp and cold as she leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. Her eyes narrowed and a bitter smile tugged at her lips. "Do you really think this," she gestured vaguely around the luxurious penthouse, "is enough to keep someone like me interested?" Liam's chest tightened. He took a step forward, his voice strained but steady. "What's that supposed to mean, Emma? I've given you everything, a home, support, my time. I thought we had something real." Emma scoffed, tossing her head back in mock laughter. "Real? Liam, what's real about any of this? You don't even know what that word means. You just throw money at everything and expect it to solve all your problems?" "That's not fair," Liam said, his tone rising slightly. "I've done everything I can to make you happy. I care about you, Emma. Isn't that enough?" "Enough." Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer disdain. She stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "You care about me? That's rich coming from someone who can barely care about himself. You don't even see it, do you? You're just empty." Liam flinched as if she'd struck him, but he held his ground. "Empty? That's how you see me? After everything we've been through?" Emma rolled her eyes, her voice dripping with condescension. "Oh, don't act so surprised. It's not just me, Liam. Everyone sees it. You're all flash and no substance. Sure, you're rich, you're handsome, but that's where it ends. There's nothing underneath." He stared at her, the weight of her words crashing down on him. "That's not true," he said quietly, though the conviction in his voice wavered. "You know that's not true." Her expression softened for a fleeting moment, but the bitterness quickly returned. "Do I? Because all I see is a man who spent his entire life building walls out of dollar bills. You're a facade, Liam, and I'm tired of pretending it's enough." The silence that followed was deafening. Liam searched her face, hoping, praying for even a glimmer of the woman he thought he knew. But Emma just stood there unflinching, her arms still crossed as if she'd already moved on in her mind. "Why are you doing this?" he asked finally, his voice breaking. "Why now?" She let out a long, exaggerated sigh. "Because someone had to say it, Liam. I don't love you. Not the real you anyway. I don't think anyone ever has. And I'm not going to waste any more of my time trying." Liam's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his throat tightening as her words cut deeper than he'd ever thought possible. For the first time in his life, he had no response. No comeback, No defense, just silence. He turned away from the glittering cityscape, the room behind him feeling as hollow as Emma's words. The meticulously curated artwork, the sleek designer furniture, the untouched bottles of champagne, they were meant to scream success, but tonight they felt suffocating. Liam grabbed a chair and slumped into it, burying his face in his hands. His father's voice echoed in his mind, a memory from years ago when he was just starting his company. Success, son, is power. Build your empire, and the world will bow to you. He had believed it once. He had sacrificed friendships, love, and his own peace of mind to chase that ideal. But now, in the suffocating silence of his penthouse, Liam couldn't ignore the truth. Power had brought him nothing but loneliness. What was the point of ruling an empire if it left you isolated, distrusted, unloved? The decision came to him in the quiet hours before dawn. Liam opened his laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard as a plan began to form. The world knew him as a billionaire. But what if that version of Liam ceased to exist? What if he stripped away everything? His money, his name, his influence. Could he discover what it felt like to be loved for who he truly was? He searched for small towns, far removed from New York's relentless pace. His eyes settled on Blue Haven, a sleepy coastal town in Maine. It was perfect, picturesque, unassuming, and utterly disconnected from his current world. By sunrise, Liam had booked a modest room at a local inn and set an early meeting with his estate manager. He would vanish, adopting the identity of Noah Cross, a rugged, modest man seeking simple work. He would trade his suits for thrift store finds, his luxury car for a beat-up truck, and his billion-dollar connections for honest, unfiltered human interaction. The thought terrified him, but it also exhilarated him. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope. 2 weeks later, Liam, or rather Noah, stood on the edge of Blue Haven. The salty tang of the ocean mingled with the fresh scent of pine as the coastal breeze swept through his unruly hair. He wore a plaid shirt, faded jeans, and scuffed boots, a stark departure from the polished image he had cultivated for years. His destination was the Harbor View Inn, a charming bed and breakfast perched near the town's edge. Its peeling paint and slightly overgrown garden hinted at better days gone by. Yet even in its wear, it radiated warmth, a feeling he hadn't experienced in far too long. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the creaky porch. The sound of a bell jingled as he pushed the door open, signaling his arrival. A young woman at the reception desk looked up. She had fiery auburn hair pulled into a loose bun and piercing green eyes that seemed to size him up in an instant. She wore a simple blouse, rolled-up sleeves revealing hands that had clearly known hard work. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady but edged with curiosity. "I'm looking for work," Liam replied, his voice lower, rougher than he was used to. "I heard you might need a handyman." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, skepticism plain on her face. "You don't look like much of a handyman." Liam suppressed a wry smile. "I learn fast." The woman leaned back, arms crossed. "We don't have much to offer. A small room, some meals, and not much pay. But if you're serious, I'll give you a week's trial." Liam nodded. "Deal. Name's Noah Cross." "I'm Charlotte Monroe," she said, her tone firm, though her eyes lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary. "Don't make me regret this." As Liam, or Noah, settled into his small, sparsely furnished room, he looked out at the harbor through the cracked window. This wasn't just a new chapter in his life. It was a chance to rewrite the entire book. The morning sunlight poured through the Harbor View Inn's weathered windows, highlighting the rustic charm of the lobby. Wooden beams crossed the ceiling, and the faint scent of lavender wafted through the air from a vase on the front desk. Behind the counter, Charlotte Monroe stood, balancing the inn's old ledger in one hand and a coffee mug in the other. Her fiery auburn hair caught the light as she scanned the numbers in the ledger with a furrowed brow. Every number told the same story, a struggle to keep the inn afloat. Bills piling up, repairs overdue, and the looming threat of foreclosure. She set the coffee mug down with a sigh, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. She couldn't afford to let the inn fail, not when it was all she had left of her parents. The jingling bell at the door broke her thoughts and Charlotte glanced up. Noah Cross stood there awkwardly, his plaid shirt slightly askew and his boots tracking dirt onto the freshly swept floor. She frowned. "You're late," she said, crossing her arms. "Didn't realize Blue Haven ran on such a tight schedule," Noah replied, his tone calm but not apologetic. Charlotte arched an eyebrow. "It does when you're working for me. Follow me." She led him out to the garden, where overgrown hedges spilled onto the stone pathway, and weeds crowded the flower beds. The Harbor View Inn was as much a part of the landscape as the harbor itself, but the years had taken their toll. "This is where you'll start," Charlotte said, gesturing at the garden. "Clean it up, trim the hedges, pull the weeds, make it look like someone actually cares about this place." Noah gave a small nod. "Got it." Charlotte hesitated. She wasn't sure what to make of him yet. His hands didn't look like they belonged to a handyman. Too smooth, too clean, and his mannerisms felt off, like he wasn't used to being spoken to so directly. But she needed help, and she couldn't afford to be picky. "Do you have any experience with this kind of work?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. "I've done a little of everything," Noah replied, bending down to inspect a tangle of weeds. "You could say I'm a fast learner." Charlotte narrowed her eyes. There was something polished about the way he spoke, even when he was trying to sound casual. But she shook off the thought. If he worked hard, that was all that mattered. "Fine," she said, "but if I catch you slacking, you're out." The day wore on, and Noah found himself knee-deep in dirt and sweat. His muscles ached in ways he hadn't felt in years, and the sun beat down relentlessly. By mid-afternoon, he had cleared the garden paths and was trimming the hedges with a pair of clunky shears that seemed older than the inn itself. Charlotte watched him from the porch, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. To her surprise, he worked steadily, not complaining once. But every now and then, she caught him pausing, his gaze drifting toward the horizon as if lost in thought. "Hey," she called out, snapping him back to the present. "Daydreaming doesn't get the job done." "Just pacing myself," Noah replied, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Charlotte rolled her eyes and stepped down from the porch. "Let me see how you're doing." She walked up to the hedge he had just trimmed and inspected his work. It was better than she expected. "Not bad," she admitted grudgingly. "Maybe you'll last longer than a week." "High praise," Noah said, straightening up and wiping the sweat from his brow. Charlotte gave him a pointed look. "Don't let it go to your head." Later that evening, Noah sat in his small, sparsely furnished room. The sounds of the harbor drifted through the cracked window, the distant cry of seagulls, the soft lapping of waves against the shore. He stared at his hands, now calloused and dirt-streaked, and couldn't help but chuckle to himself. A few weeks ago, these hands had signed million-dollar deals. Now they were pulling weeds. He thought about Charlotte, her sharp wit, her no-nonsense attitude, and the way her green eyes flashed when she was annoyed. She was different from anyone he had met before. Grounded, honest, and utterly focused on her goal of saving the inn. Noah, or Liam, knew he had to be careful. Every now and then, he caught her watching him, her gaze sharp and questioning. She was too perceptive for her own good. If he wasn't careful, she would figure out that Noah Cross was more than just a drifter looking for work. The morning in Blue Haven was crisp, the scent of salt water mingling with the sweetness of freshly baked bread from Mrs. Harlow's bakery down the road. Liam, or Noah as he was known here, stepped out of his modest room at the Harbor View Inn, adjusting the worn baseball cap he had picked up at a thrift store. His muscles ached from the previous day's work in the garden, but there was something oddly satisfying about the physical exhaustion. It felt real. As he walked toward the tool shed, he caught sight of Charlotte on the porch, sipping her coffee and reviewing her ledger, her expression a mix of determination and fatigue. "Ready for another day of manual labor?" she called out without looking up. "More than ready," he replied, grabbing a pair of gloves from the shed. "I hear there's a particularly stubborn weed patch with my name on it." Charlotte smirked faintly, though she quickly masked it. "Let's see if you last through the week first." The hours passed in a blur of sweat and dirt. Noah found himself repairing the broken fence along the inn's perimeter. a task that required more effort than he had anticipated. As he hammered the last nail into place, he heard a voice behind him. "Not bad, Noah," said an older woman with a warm smile. Mrs. Harlow stood there, holding a basket of bread and muffins. "For someone who looks like they've never held a hammer before." Noah chuckled. "You caught me. I've been faking it the whole time." Mrs. Harlow laughed and handed him the basket. "These are for Charlotte, but I figured you'd earned a muffin or two. You're making quite the impression, you know." "Oh?" he said, raising an eyebrow. She leaned in conspiratorially. "The town's been talking about you. We don't get many strangers here, especially ones willing to get their hands dirty." "Well," Noah replied, his tone light, "I'm here to work, not to stir up gossip." Mrs. Harlow gave him a knowing look. "Blue Haven has a way of pulling secrets out of people, dear. You'd best be careful." Later that evening, Noah returned to the inn, his arms sore from the day's labor. He found Charlotte in the dining room, arranging freshly washed linens on the tables. The soft glow of the setting sun bathed the room in warm light, and for a moment, Noah hesitated in the doorway, watching her. "You're staring," Charlotte said without looking up. "Just admiring the hard work," he replied, stepping into the room. "These linens look great." Charlotte rolled her eyes but didn't hide the small smile tugging at her lips. "Flattery doesn't work on me, Noah." "I'll keep that in mind," he said, leaning against a nearby chair. "You've got a lot on your plate, though. Ever think about slowing down?" She stopped what she was doing and looked at him, her expression softening. "I can't afford to slow down. If I don't fight for this place, no one will. The Harborview Inn is more than just a building. It's my family's legacy. Losing it would mean losing them all over again." Her voice faltered slightly, and Noah saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. For a moment he wanted to reach out, to tell her that he understood what it felt like to carry the weight of expectations. But he held back, knowing that revealing too much could jeopardize everything. "You won't lose it," he said instead, his voice steady. "You've got more fight in you than anyone I've ever met." Charlotte blinked, taken aback by the sincerity in his tone. She quickly turned away, busying herself with the linens again. "Thanks," she murmured. As the night deepened, Noah sat outside on the inn's porch, staring out at the moonlit harbor. The town was quiet now, the only sounds the distant lapping of waves and the occasional creak of the old wooden steps. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace, but it was fragile, like glass waiting to shatter. His phone buzzed in his pocket, jolting him from his thoughts. He hesitated before pulling it out. The screen lit up with a name that made his stomach sink. Elliot, one of his closest associates back in New York. "Noah," Elliot's voice came through, low and urgent. "We need to talk." Liam, or Noah, glanced around, ensuring no one was within earshot. "This isn't a good time, Elliot. You think disappearing into some small town is the solution? People are starting to ask questions. Investors are concerned. You can't just vanish, Liam." "I'm not coming back," Liam said firmly, his grip tightening on the phone. "Not yet." Elliot sighed on the other end. "Fine, but don't think this is over. You can't hide forever." Liam ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, his jaw clenched. He leaned back against the porch railing, staring up at the stars. The life he had left behind felt like a shadow creeping closer, threatening to engulf the fragile world he was trying to build here. As he sat there, the inn's door creaked open behind him. Charlotte stepped out, a mug of tea in her hands. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her tone casual. "Something like that," he replied, not turning to look at her. She joined him on the porch, sitting a few steps away. They sat in silence for a while, the night wrapping around them like a blanket. Finally, Charlotte spoke, her voice quiet. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to just leave. Start over somewhere new. No expectations, no baggage." Liam turned to her, surprised by how closely her words mirrored his own thoughts. "And what stops you?" She shrugged, a faint smile on her lips. "The same thing that stops everyone, I guess. Fear, responsibility, and maybe hope that things can still be fixed." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then quietly Liam replied, "Sometimes starting over isn't about running away. It's about finding out what really matters. Charlotte glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Maybe, she said softly, before standing and heading back inside. Liam watched her go, the sound of her footsteps fading into the night. Her words lingered with him, and for the first time, he wondered if starting over would ever truly free him from the man he used to be. The early morning mist clung to the rolling hills of Blue Haven, shrouding the Harbor View Inn in a veil of gray. Noah, Liam, walked toward the tool shed, the tang of salt in the crisp air grounding him momentarily in the simplicity he craved. The rhythmic crunch of his boots against the gravel path was a comfort, a reminder of the quiet life he was trying to embrace. He had just reached for the tool shed's latch when another crunch, faint but distinct, broke the stillness. Turning sharply, his eyes landed on a figure standing at the edge of the garden. Even through the haze, the figure's polished presence stood out, a jarring contrast to the rustic charm of Blue Haven. Elliot. Liam's pulse quickened as his former business associate stepped into view, the sharp lines of his tailored suit almost absurd against the quaint backdrop of the inn. Elliot's gaze was calculating, his every movement deliberate as he closed the distance between them. "You're not easy to find," Elliot said, his tone cutting but low enough to avoid drawing attention. "I hope you know that." Liam's chest tightened. He glanced instinctively toward the inn, ensuring no one was within earshot. "What are you doing here, Elliot?" Elliot stopped a few paces away, crossing his arms. "You know exactly why I'm here," he said, his voice clipped. "Investors are restless, the board's in a panic, and your absence isn't helping. You can't just vanish and expect everything to hold together." Liam squared his shoulders, his jaw tightening. "I told you I needed time. I'm not ready to come back." Elliot's eyes narrowed. "Time for what? To play handyman in a town that barely has a population? You think this is going to fix whatever it is you're running from?" "I'm not running," Liam snapped, his voice carrying a rare edge. "I'm searching for something real, something that doesn't revolve around quarterly reports or profit margins." Elliot let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "And what happens when they figure out who you are?" He gestured toward the inn. "You think these people will see Liam Kingsley, the man? Or will they see Liam Kingsley, the billionaire? You don't get to choose how they see you." Liam's fist clenched at his sides, his composure slipping. "They don't need to know who I am. I'm just Noah Cross to them. That's all that matters." "Secrets like this don't stay buried," Elliot countered, his voice softening slightly. "And when they come out, and they will come out, it's going to blow up in your face. Do you really think you're protecting anyone by lying?" Liam's gaze dropped to the ground for a moment, Elliot's words cutting closer to the truth than he wanted to admit. But then he looked back up, his expression firm. "I didn't ask you to come here, Elliot, and I'm not asking for your advice. Just leave. Let me figure this out on my own." Elliot sighed, exasperation etched into his features. "You think this little experiment is noble, but all it's doing is delaying the inevitable. You have responsibilities, Liam, to your company, to your family's name." "I know my responsibilities," Liam replied, his tone sharp but quiet. "But this is my life, and for once, I'm going to live it on my terms." For a moment, Elliot didn't respond. He studied Liam with a mixture of frustration and something that almost resembled pity. "Fine," he said finally, his voice quieter now. "I'll leave. But remember this, you don't get to rewrite your story just because you want to. Sooner or later, your past catches up with you." Liam didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the ground as Elliot turned and walked away. The sound of polished shoes crunching against the gravel faded into the mist, leaving Liam alone once more. He exhaled slowly, his breath clouding in the cold air. The weight of Elliot's words pressed heavily on him, threatening to unravel the fragile sense of peace he'd tried to build in Blue Haven. As much as he wanted to ignore it, the truth was clear. His double life wasn't sustainable. But what choice did he have? Later that day, Charlotte noticed Liam sitting on the inn's back porch, staring at the horizon with an intensity that made her pause. Something about him seemed different, distracted, almost haunted. She stepped closer, clearing her throat to announce her presence. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone cautious. Liam looked up quickly, masking his unease. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" Charlotte pressed, her curiosity piqued. "Life," he said vaguely, standing up and brushing off his hands, "and how much of it we spend chasing things that don't matter." Charlotte tilted her head, studying him. "That's a little deep for a handyman." Liam chuckled softly, deflecting her suspicion. "Guess I'm full of surprises." As the day turned into evening, Charlotte's own doubts began to stir. She couldn't shake the feeling that Noah was hiding something. His polished way of speaking, his subtle confidence, it all felt too refined, too practiced. Her suspicions deepened when she overheard him on the phone later that night. Standing just out of sight near the dining room, she caught snippets of his conversation. "I told you, Elliot, I'm handling it." "No, I don't care about the board's opinion right now." Charlotte frowned, her grip tightening on the edge of the doorway. "Elliot? Bored? What kind of handyman had conversations like that?" Before she could piece it together, Noah ended the call abruptly in turn. Charlotte quickly stepped back, her heart racing as she pretended to be inspecting the dining room's lights. "Everything okay?" Noah asked, his tone casual but guarded. The Blue Haven Festival was in full swing, and the quaint coastal town buzzed with life. Colorful banners hung from lampposts, and the smell of fried dough and salt water mingled in the air. Children ran through the cobblestone streets with balloons in hand, while shopkeepers proudly displayed their wares. It was the kind of event that made Blue Haven feel timeless, a world apart from the chaos of the modern city. Liam, or Noah, stood near the entrance of Harborview Inn, watching the townsfolk come together in celebration. The past few days had been a whirlwind since Charlotte discovered his secret. She hadn't confronted him outright, but he could feel the change in her demeanor. Her glances lingered longer, her words carried an edge of caution, and there was a distance between them that hadn't been there before. "Don't just stand there," Charlotte's voice broke his thoughts. She appeared beside him, holding a box of festival decorations. Her green eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked onto his. "You're supposed to be helping." "Right," Noah said, taking the box from her hands. "Where do you want these?" "By the front porch," she replied curtly, turning to head back inside. Liam followed, his mind racing. The weight of her suspicion hung heavy, and he knew the confrontation was inevitable. But not here. Not today. The festival provided a brief reprieve from the tension. Liam and Charlotte worked together to decorate the inn's porch, stringing fairy lights and hanging flower garlands. The townsfolk passed by, offering compliments and stopping to chat. "You've done wonders for the inn, Charlotte," said Mrs. Harlow, carrying a tray of fresh pastries. "It's never looked lovelier." Charlotte offered a polite smile. "It's a team effort." Noah glanced at her, catching the faintest flicker of vulnerability in her expression. She was trying so hard to keep everything together, for the inn, for herself, and he admired her resilience more than ever. As evening fell, the festival reached its peak. The harbor glowed with lanterns floating gently on the water, and music drifted through the air as couples danced under the stars. Noah found himself standing near the edge of the crowd, drawn to the sight of Charlotte. She stood by a booth, talking to a local artist who had donated a painting for auction. Her laugh carried on the breeze, light and genuine. And for a moment, Liam forgot everything else. "Are you going to stare all night, or are you going to dance?" Mrs. Harlow's voice interrupted his thoughts. Liam turned to see the older woman smirking at him, a knowing glint in her eyes. "I don't think she wants to dance with me." "Don't be so sure," Mrs. Harlow said, nudging him forward. "The only way to find out is to ask." Gathering every ounce of courage, Liam crossed the room towards Charlotte as the music shifted to a slow, soulful melody. She stood near the edge of the crowd, her arms lightly crossed, her gaze flicking between the dancers and the soft glow of the garden lights. She seemed lost in thought, her usual guarded confidence softened by the evening's warmth. "Charlotte," he said, his voice low but clear. She turned to face him, her green eyes meeting his. There was a flicker of surprise quickly masked by her usual composure as he extended his hand. "Dance with me?" he asked, his words gentle, almost hesitant. Charlotte stared at him, her expression unreadable. Liam felt his heart pound in the pause that followed, each second stretching unbearably. For a moment he was sure she would refuse, that the walls between them were too high, too fortified. But then slowly, she slipped her hand into his. Her touch was tentative, her fingers warm against his. "Just one dance," she said softly, her voice carrying a note of caution. He nodded, his lips curving into a faint smile. "One's all I need." They stepped onto the makeshift dance floor, the soft glow of the garden lights surrounding them like a halo. The crowd faded into the background as Liam rested his hand lightly on her waist, his other hand still clasping hers. They began to move, swaying gently to the rhythm of the music. At first, the silence between them was palpable, the weight of their recent history pressing down like an invisible barrier. But as the song unfolded, Charlotte's stance began to relax. Her shoulders softened, her grip on his hand loosening just enough for Liam to sense the faintest crack in her armor. "This is nice," Charlotte murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam glanced down at her, his heart aching at the vulnerability in her tone. "It is," he replied, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I didn't think I'd get a chance like this. With you." She looked up at him, her green eyes glinting in the low light. "A chance for what, exactly?" "To feel like this," Liam said, his words quiet but sincere. "Like I'm part of something real, something that matters." Charlotte's gaze softened, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "Real," she repeated, her voice laced with both curiosity and doubt. "Funny, coming from someone who spent so much time pretending." Her words hit him like a sudden gust of wind, and he faltered, his rhythm momentarily breaking. "Charlotte, She shook her head, stepping back before he could finish. Her hand slipped from his, leaving his palm cold in the absence of her touch. "I should check on the caterers," she said abruptly, her tone distant. The warmth that had been building between them moments ago was gone, replaced by the guarded resolve he had come to know so well. "Charlotte, wait," he said, his voice pleading, but she was already turning away. "Enjoy the rest of the festival, Liam," she said over her shoulder, her words carrying a finality that left him rooted in place. Liam stood there, the music playing on as couples swayed around him. He clenched his fists at his sides, his chest heavy with the weight of her words. The brief moment of connection they had shared was gone, shattered by the reality of his lies. He watched as Charlotte moved through the crowd, her figure disappearing into the glow of the inn. He knew then that earning her trust again would take more than a dance. It would take everything he had. As the night wore on, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that everything was unraveling. His fears were confirmed when a man in a sharp suit approached Charlotte near the auction table. Liam recognized him immediately. Jonathan Keene, a property developer with a reputation for ruthless tactics. Keene handed Charlotte a business card, his smile too polished to be genuine. Liam moved closer, catching snippets of their conversation. "Harborview Inn is a lovely property," Keene was saying. "But let's be honest, Miss Monroe, it's a money pit. Sell it to me and I'll ensure you walk away with enough to start fresh." "I'm not selling," Charlotte replied firmly, her voice laced with steel. "The inn isn't just property, it's my family's legacy." Keene's smile didn't waver, but there was a sharpness in his eyes. "Think about it. The longer you hold on, the harder it'll be to keep it afloat. And from what I hear," he glanced pointedly at Noah, his smile widening, "you've already got enough surprises on your hands." Charlotte stiffened, her hand tightening around the business card. "Good night, Mr. Keene." As Keene walked away, his gaze briefly met Liam's, a smirk playing on his lips. The message was clear. "I know who you are." Back at the inn, Charlotte confronted Liam in the dimly lit dining room. The space, usually warm and inviting, felt colder now, the silence broken only by the faint creak of the wooden floor beneath her steps. She stood a few feet away from him, her hands trembling at her sides, her green eyes burning with anger, and something deeper. Hurt. "Who are you, Noah?" she asked, her voice wavering. "Or should I say, whoever it is you're pretending to be?" Liam's chest tightened. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The weight of everything unsaid pressed against him like a tidal wave. "Say something," she demanded, her voice rising as her composure cracked. I let you into my home, into my life, into this place that means everything to me. And now I don't even know if any of it was real. He took a step toward her, but she flinched, holding up a hand as if to stop him. Don't, she said, her voice breaking. Don't you dare try to smooth this over with more lies. Liam's throat felt dry, his heart pounding so loudly he could barely think. Charlotte, I never meant to hurt you. Then why? She interrupted, her tone sharp, cutting through his words like a blade. Why did you lie to me? What was the plan? To play the noble handyman until it suited you to leave? Her voice cracked on the last word, and she looked away, blinking rapidly. I'm sorry, he said softly, the words feeling utterly inadequate. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want you to see me as someone I'm not. Charlotte's head snapped back toward him, her gaze piercing. Who are you then? Tell me the truth, right now, or I swear, Liam, Noah, whoever you are, we're done. Her words echoed in the stillness, leaving no room for escape. Liam's shoulders slumped as he exhaled shakily. There was no hiding anymore. My name isn't Noah, he admitted, his voice low, heavy with the truth. It's Liam. Liam Kingsley. Charlotte stared at him, her breath catching. She didn't speak, but her expression said everything. Shock, disbelief, betrayal. I'm a tech entrepreneur, he continued, his words stumbling out. A billionaire. I left New York because my life there felt hollow. Every relationship I had, it wasn't real. People only saw the money, the power. No one ever saw me. I thought if I started over, without all of that, I could finally find something genuine. Someone genuine. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't let the tears fall. And you thought lying to me was the way to do that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You thought I wouldn't care who you were? Do you know how humiliating this feels? I trusted you. Charlotte, Liam pleaded, taking another step forward. Everything I've done here, it's been real. The work, the connection I feel with you, none of that was a lie. She shook her head, the tears finally spilling over. I don't even know who you are. Please, he said, his voice breaking. Let me explain. But Charlotte turned on her heel, her steps hurried and unsteady as she walked away. The dining room door swung shut behind her, leaving Liam alone in the echoing silence, the words he hadn't said still hanging in the air. The days following Liam's confession were tense and silent. Charlotte avoided him entirely, her presence a ghost haunting the Harborview Inn. She moved quickly through the halls, her expressions distant and closed off. Every glance she gave him, if she looked at him at all, was a mix of betrayal and pain. Liam, for his part, didn't press her. He stayed out of her way, working quietly and trying to figure out how to make things right. But the walls felt smaller, the air heavier. It was as though the inn itself mourned the fracture between them. On the third morning, the tension broke. Charlotte stood in the kitchen, furiously scrubbing a pot that didn't need cleaning. The sounds of her motions, metal against water, the rhythmic splash, echoed through the otherwise empty room. Liam hesitated in the doorway, his heart racing. He couldn't wait any longer. Charlotte, he said, his voice tentative. She froze but didn't turn around. What do you want? She asked, her tone icy. To explain, Liam said, stepping inside but keeping a respectful distance. Please, you deserve that much. Charlotte set the pot down with a clatter and turned to face him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, though her expression was steeled. An explanation, she repeated, her words dripping with disbelief. Do you really think anything you say will make this better? Liam took a deep breath. I think it might help you understand. Understand what? She snapped. That you lied to me from the moment we met? That you pretended to be someone else so you could… What? Play at being a normal person? It wasn't about playing, Liam said, his voice rising slightly. I was trying to escape, to figure out who I was without all the noise of my old life. Charlotte laughed bitterly. And you thought this was the way to do it? Coming here and fooling everyone? Fooling me? I didn't mean to fool you, Liam said, his voice breaking. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. But then I met you and you… Don't, Charlotte cut him off, her eyes flashing. Don't try to make this about your feelings for me. That doesn't excuse what you did. Liam fell silent, his shoulders slumping. You're right, he said quietly. It doesn't. The room was silent for a moment, the only sound the faint ticking of the wall clock. Finally, Charlotte spoke, her voice trembling. You made me believe in you, she said, her anger giving way to sadness. I thought you were different, but you're just like everyone else. Someone who sees the Harbor View Inn as a stage for their own drama. Liam stepped closer, his heart aching. That's not true. Charlotte, everything I've done here, everything I've felt, it's real. You have to believe me. I don't have to do anything, Charlotte said, shaking her head, except protect what's left of my family's legacy. And that starts with you leaving? Her words hit him like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to argue but stopped himself. Instead, he nodded, his throat tight. If that's what you want, he said softly, I'll go. By noon, Liam had packed his things. The small room that had become his sanctuary now felt cold and foreign. He stood in the doorway, looking back one last time before stepping out into the hall. Charlotte was there, waiting by the front desk. She didn't say anything as he approached, her expression unreadable. I'll send my final paycheck to your account, she said, her tone flat. Keep it, Liam replied. Put it toward the repairs. Charlotte's lips tightened, but she didn't argue. She watched as he stepped outside, the creak of the inn's front door echoing in the quiet air. For a long moment, Charlotte stayed where she was, her gaze fixed on the door he had just walked through. Her heart felt heavy, but she pushed the feeling aside. She had work to do. Liam drove out of Blue Haven with the windows rolled down, the salty breeze carrying a mix of regret and finality. As the town faded into the distance, he couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. The Harbor View Inn stood on the horizon, its silhouette framed by the sea. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. Leaving had been the right thing to do, hadn't it? He couldn't shake the image of Charlotte's face, her eyes filled with hurt as she told him to leave. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel good, he murmured to himself, but the words felt hollow. Back at the inn, Charlotte sat in the small office, surrounded by papers and ledgers. She tried to focus on the numbers, on the tasks at hand, but her mind kept drifting. Memories of Noah or Liam flooded her thoughts. The way he worked tirelessly in the garden, the quiet moments they shared on the porch, the sincerity in his eyes when he talked about starting over. She pushed the memories aside, forcing herself to concentrate. The Harbor View Inn needed her. She couldn't afford to dwell on what was lost. But as the hours passed, a question lingered in the back of her mind, refusing to be silenced. Had she made a mistake? The days that followed Liam's departure were quiet but not peaceful. The Harbor View Inn continued its routines, but there was an undercurrent of tension. The absence of Liam, or Noah, was a weight Charlotte felt more than she wanted to admit. The inn still needed repairs, the ledgers still didn't balance, and the looming threat of the property developer lingered like a storm cloud. Charlotte busied herself with work, avoiding the moments of stillness that allowed her mind to wander. But no amount of focus could silence the nagging question. Had she been too harsh? One afternoon, while cleaning out her late parents' office, Charlotte stumbled upon an old dusty box tucked away in a forgotten corner. Curious, she pulled it down, coughing as a cloud of dust billowed into the air. Inside, she found letters, contracts, and photographs, pieces of her family's history. Her fingers trembled as she opened the first letter. It was from her father, addressed to a lawyer, discussing a battle he'd fought years ago against the same property developer threatening the inn now. Charlotte's eyes widened as she read further. The letters revealed her parents' unwavering determination to protect the Harbor View Inn. They had faced financial struggles, legal threats, and sleepless nights, but they had never given up. By the time she finished reading, tears streamed down her face. She felt the weight of her parents' legacy more profoundly than ever. The inn wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of resilience, a piece of her family's soul. That evening, Charlotte sat on the porch, the old letters spread out beside her. The sun dipped low over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the harbor. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to reflect, not just on the inn, but on Liam. She thought about his quiet determination, the way he had thrown himself into the work, and the moments they had shared. Despite the lies, there was a sincerity in him she couldn't ignore. And then there were his parting words, offering to leave his paycheck for the inn's repairs. It wasn't the action of a manipulative man, it was the action of someone who cared. Maybe I was too harsh, she whispered to herself. Meanwhile, Liam was back in New York, sitting in the corner of an upscale cafe, his laptop open in front of him. The familiar hum of city life surrounded him, but it felt distant, almost foreign. He had returned to a world he no longer felt a part of. On the screen was a list of legal firms. He had spent the past few days researching property law and historical preservation. He couldn't shake the thought of Harbor View Inn or Charlotte. He wanted to help, even if she never forgave him. After hours of searching, he found what he was looking for: a lawyer with expertise in historic properties and a reputation for taking on powerful developers. Liam sent an email explaining the situation and attaching scans of the documents Charlotte had once mentioned about the inn's history. He closed his laptop with a sigh, leaning back in his chair. It wasn't enough to make things right, but it was a start. The next day, Charlotte received a call from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello? Miss Monroe," said a calm professional voice. "My name is Angela Prescott. I'm a property lawyer, and I've been informed about the situation with the Harbor View Inn. A concerned party asked me to reach out." Charlotte frowned. "A concerned party?" "They prefer to remain anonymous," Angela replied. "But they've covered my initial fees and provided me with documents that could prove invaluable to your case." Charlotte's heart raced. She didn't need to ask who the anonymous party was. There was only one person who would go to such lengths. "Can we meet in person to discuss this?" Angela continued. "Yes," Charlotte said quickly. "When are you available?" Later that evening, as Charlotte reviewed the legal documents Angela had brought, her feelings toward Liam began to shift. The betrayal still stung, but his quiet efforts to help her, without seeking credit, spoke volumes. He wasn't trying to win her over. He was trying to make amends. The tension eased slightly the following day when a local contractor arrived to inspect the inn's structural issues. "This one's on the house," he told her, with a wink. "Someone paid in advance." Charlotte felt her chest tighten. Once again, Liam's hand was unmistakable. Slowly but surely, he was working to repair not just the inn, but the trust he had broken. That night, a courier arrived with an envelope addressed to Charlotte. Inside was a letter written in neat, familiar handwriting. "Charlotte, I know words won't fix the pain I've caused, but I hope my actions can start to. The Harbor View Inn is more than just a place. It's a piece of your heart, and you deserve to keep it. I'll do whatever I can to help, even if it means staying in the background. You're stronger than anyone I've ever met, and I know you can save it. Yours." Liam. Charlotte clutched the letter, her emotions swirling. She wasn't ready to forgive him, not entirely, but for the first time since their confrontation, she felt a glimmer of hope. As she folded the letter and placed it carefully in her desk drawer, a sharp knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message: "Back off, or you'll regret it." Charlotte's hands shook as she reread the note. The property developer wasn't just playing games anymore. They were making threats. She closed the door, her resolve hardening. The Harbor View Inn had survived countless challenges, and she wasn't about to let fear win. But she couldn't do it alone. The morning sun cast long shadows over Blue Haven, the town abuzz with news of a gala to be held at the Harbor View Inn. Charlotte had hesitated to host such a grand event, but Angela, the lawyer Liam had hired, assured her it was the perfect way to rally community support and secure funds. More importantly, it would send a message to the developer. The town was united behind her. Charlotte stood in the garden, surveying the preparations. Volunteers buzzed around her, setting up tables, stringing lights, and arranging flowers. She couldn't help but feel a pang of gratitude for their support, even as her mind wandered to Liam. His anonymous gestures had done more than ease her financial burdens. They had started to repair the cracks in her trust. "Charlotte," Mrs. Harlow called from across the lawn, waving a clipboard. "We've got more food donations coming in from the bakery. Looks like this gala will be the talk of the town." Charlotte managed a smile. "Let's hope it's enough." As the day wore on, Charlotte's nerves grew. By the time evening arrived, the Harbor View Inn was transformed. Twinkling lights draped across the garden, casting a warm glow over the gathering crowd. The townsfolk arrived in their finest attire, mingling and laughing as music played softly in the background. Charlotte moved through the crowd, greeting guests and ensuring everything was running smoothly. But her heart skipped when she spotted Liam at the entrance, dressed in a tailored suit that somehow managed to make him look both polished and approachable. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. Liam stepped forward, his expression hesitant but hopeful. "Charlotte," he said softly, "thank you for letting me come." She folded her arms, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I didn't invite you." "I know," he admitted, his voice steady, "but I had to be here. For you. For the inn." Her gaze softened, though she didn't let her guard down entirely. "Why now?" "Because I believe in what you're doing," Liam said earnestly, "and because I needed to prove to you that I'm not the man you think I am." Charlotte studied him for a long moment before nodding toward the crowd. "If you're staying, make yourself useful." A faint smile tugged at Liam's lips. "Anything you need." The gala unfolded beautifully. Guests bid generously at the silent auction, and local musicians filled the air with lively melodies. As the night deepened, Charlotte found herself more at ease. The community's support was overwhelming, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope. During a lull in the festivities, Liam approached her, extending a hand. "May I have this dance?" Charlotte hesitated, her eyes scanning his for any sign of insincerity. Finding none, she placed her hand in his. They moved to the rhythm of the music, the world around them fading. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the melody. "For what?" he asked, his tone just as soft. "For everything," she replied. "The lawyer, the contractor, the donations. I know it was you." Liam's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because you and this inn deserve a chance." Charlotte's eyes shimmered with unspoken emotion. "You're still on thin ice, you know." Liam chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "Then I guess I'll just have to keep proving myself." As the dance ended, the spell was broken by Angela's approach. Her expression was serious, a manila envelope clutched in her hands. "Charlotte," she said, her tone low, "we need to talk." They stepped aside and Angela handed her the envelope. "We've discovered something troubling. Nathan, your employee, has been leaking information to the developer." Charlotte's stomach dropped. "What kind of information?" "Financial records, repair schedules, anything they could use to paint the inn as a failing venture," Angela explained. "But don't worry, we've gathered evidence proving he was bribed. This will discredit anything they try to use against you." Charlotte's hands shook as she held the envelope. "I trusted him." Liam placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll handle this," he said firmly. "You're not alone in this fight." For the first time that night, Charlotte allowed herself to lean into his strength. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, she truly believed they could win. The courtroom was packed. Townsfolk filled the benches, their faces etched with both determination and unease. The stakes were high, higher than they'd ever been. The Harbor View Inn wasn't just a piece of property. It was the heart of Blue Haven, a symbol of the town's resilience. But the opposition was formidable. Charlotte sat at the plaintiff's table, her back straight, her chin held high. Beside her, Angela Prescott organized a thick stack of documents, her demeanor calm but focused. On the opposing side sat Jonathan Keene, the developer, his smug expression betraying his confidence. At the back of the courtroom, Liam lingered, his presence quiet but resolute. He wasn't there to take center stage. He was there to support Charlotte in any way she needed. The judge entered and the room fell silent. The proceedings began, each side presenting its arguments with practiced precision. Midway through the hearing, Keene's team called Nathan to the stand. Charlotte's stomach churned as her former employee took his oath, his gaze avoiding hers. Nathan's testimony was damning. He presented financial records that painted a bleak picture of the inn's finances, records that had clearly been obtained under dubious circumstances. His words, carefully crafted to imply incompetence, caused murmurs to ripple through the courtroom. Angela leaned over to Charlotte, her voice a low whisper. "Stay calm. We're ready for this." Charlotte nodded, though her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She glanced back at Liam, who gave her a reassuring nod. When it was their turn to cross-examine, Angela wasted no time. She stood with the confidence of someone who had uncovered the truth and was ready to wield it. "Mr. Nathan," she began, her tone sharp, "you claim these financial documents were provided voluntarily. Is that correct?" Nathan hesitated. "Yes." Angela raised an eyebrow, producing a stack of papers. "Then can you explain why these documents bear your initials in the corner, marking them as confidential, and why they were found on Mr. Keene's desk, alongside a signed check made out to you?" The courtroom gasped. Nathan's face went pale. Angela pressed on, not giving him time to recover. "How much did the Landry Corporation pay you to betray the Harborview Inn?" I didn't betray anyone," Nathan stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. Angela leaned closer, her voice cutting like a blade. "We have the check. We have your bank statements. Do you really want to add perjury to your list of offenses?" Nathan crumbled under the weight of her words. "I didn't have a choice," he blurted out, his voice desperate. "They threatened me, said they'd ruin me if I didn't cooperate." Angela turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we submit this as evidence of coercion and bribery, discrediting Mr. Nathan's testimony entirely." The judge nodded, her expression serious. "The evidence will be admitted." When Charlotte took the stand, the room seemed to hold its breath. She spoke with quiet strength, recounting the history of the Harborview Inn, the battles her parents had fought to preserve it, and the deep connection the inn had to the town. "This isn't just a business," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's a part of who we are. Harborview Inn isn't just bricks and mortar. It's a place where memories are made, where lives are shared. To lose it would be to lose a piece of our soul." Her words resonated deeply. Even the judge's normally stoic expression softened. As the judge prepared to deliver her ruling, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Charlotte held her breath, her hands clenched tightly around the edges of the table. "The evidence presented by the Harborview Inn demonstrates a clear commitment to historical preservation," the judge began. "Furthermore, the opposing party's actions, including coercion and bribery, undermine their credibility. It is the decision of this court to rule in favor of Harborview Inn." The room erupted in cheers. Charlotte exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, tears streaming down her face as she turned to Angela. "You did it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We did it," Angela corrected, her smile warm. That evening, the town gathered at the inn to celebrate their victory. Laughter and music filled the air, and the weight that had hung over Blue Haven for months seemed to lift. Liam approached Charlotte as she stood by the garden, watching the festivities with a mix of pride and exhaustion. "Congratulations," he said softly. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You had a hand in this, didn't you?" He shrugged, a small smile playing at his lips. "I did what I could." Charlotte looked at him for a long moment before finally speaking. "Thank you, Liam, for everything." His gaze softened. "Does this mean I'm forgiven?" "Not entirely," she replied, though there was a glimmer of warmth in her tone. "But it's a start." They stood in companionable silence, the sounds of the celebration surrounding them. For the first time in weeks, Charlotte felt a sense of peace and the faint stirrings of something more. The Harborview Inn glowed with a warmth that mirrored the town's renewed spirit. The courtroom victory had not only secured its future, but had also strengthened the bond between the townspeople and their beloved inn. For Charlotte, it was a time of rebuilding, not just the inn, but her trust, her sense of purpose, and perhaps her heart. Liam stood at the edge of the garden, watching Charlotte as she directed a group of volunteers. Her hair glinted in the sunlight, her laughter carrying over the gentle hum of activity. She was in her element, and he couldn't help but admire her resilience. Are you going to stand there all day, or are you going to help? Charlotte called out, her tone teasing. Liam chuckled, stepping forward. You seem to have everything under control. Not everything, she replied, handing him a box of tools. There's still work to be done. As the weeks passed, the Harborview Inn flourished. Repairs were completed, the gardens bloomed with new life, and the inn became a gathering place for the community. Charlotte and Liam worked together seamlessly, their partnership evolving into something deeper. The wounds of the past began to heal, replaced by a trust forged through shared effort. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Charlotte found herself standing on the docks, gazing out at the water. The air was cool, the sound of waves lapping against the wooden posts soothing her thoughts. Liam approached quietly, carrying a small wooden box. Mind if I join you? She turned, smiling softly. It's a free dock. He chuckled, setting the box down beside her. I've been thinking about what this place means to you, to the town, and what it's come to mean to me. Charlotte's heart fluttered, but she kept her expression steady. What are you getting at, Liam? He opened the box, revealing a delicate ring set with a small but brilliant sapphire. It was vintage, its intricate design reminiscent of something from another era. This belonged to my grandmother, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. She used to tell me that the most valuable things in life weren't the ones you could buy, but the ones you built with love and care. Charlotte's breath caught as he stepped closer, taking her hand. I know I've made mistakes, he continued, his gaze locked on hers. But you've shown me what it means to fight for something real, something worth preserving. Charlotte Monroe, will you let me stand by your side? Not just for the inn, but for everything? Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at him, the sincerity in his voice cutting through any lingering doubts. You're impossible, she whispered, a smile breaking through her tears. Is that a yes? He asked, his tone hopeful. Charlotte nodded, her voice catching. Yes. The town celebrated their engagement with the same enthusiasm they had shown for the courtroom victory. Harborview Inn hosted a small but heartfelt gathering, the gardens twinkling with fairy lights as laughter and music filled the air. Mrs. Harlow, always the sharp observer, pulled Liam aside. You've come a long way, city boy, she said with a smirk. Don't mess it up. Liam laughed, raising his glass. I wouldn't dare. As the celebration wound down, Charlotte and Liam found themselves alone in the garden. The moon cast a silver glow over the flowers, and the air was thick with the scent of jasmine. Are you ready for what's next? Liam asked, his voice soft, as he wrapped an arm around Charlotte's shoulders. The warmth of his touch steadied her, even as the gentle breeze from the harbor stirred the night air. Charlotte tilted her head back to look up at him, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of the moonlight. There was a vulnerability there, but also strength, the strength he had come to admire so deeply. Ready? She murmured, a small smile tugging at her lips. I've been fighting for this place my entire life. The real question is, are you ready? Liam's gaze softened, his fingers brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. I wasn't ready for you, he admitted, his voice laced with sincerity. You changed everything for me, Charlotte. You showed me what it means to care about something, about someone, with everything you have. Her breath caught, and she placed her hand gently on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. You've changed me too, she whispered. I didn't think I could trust anyone again. But then you showed me, with every step, every action, that I could. He leaned closer, their foreheads nearly touching. You're everything I never knew I needed, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And I promise, whatever comes next, every challenge, every moment of joy, I'm all in. For you. For us. Charlotte's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but her smile was radiant. You'd better mean that, she teased, though her voice quivered with emotion, because I'm not about to let you off easy. Liam chuckled, his lips brushing against her temple. Wouldn't expect anything less. She turned to face the horizon, her fingers intertwining with his. The two of them stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything they had fought for finally lifting. The soft lapping of the waves against the dock and the faint rustle of the garden behind them filled the air, as if the world itself was offering its blessing. The future might not be easy, Charlotte said, her voice steady despite the flicker of uncertainty. But as long as you're ready to get your hands dirty, Liam smiled, pulling her closer. Always. They gazed out at the horizon together, their connection unspoken but unbreakable. Behind them, the Harbor View Inn stood proud, its lights glowing warmly against the night sky, a beacon of hope, resilience, and the love that had made it all possible. For the first time in what felt like forever, Charlotte allowed herself to truly believe in the promise of tomorrow. And for the first time, Liam felt he had finally found a home, not in a place, but in her. As Liam and Charlotte gazed at the horizon, their journey served as a poignant reminder of what truly matters in life. The story of the Harbor View Inn wasn't just about saving a building, it was about saving the heart of a community, discovering the power of authenticity, and learning that love grows strongest when it's built on trust and resilience. Through their trials, Liam learned that no amount of wealth or status could replace genuine connections and a sense of belonging. Charlotte, too, discovered that opening her heart to vulnerability was the key to forging deeper bonds. Together, they proved that sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most meaningful victories. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to fight for something you truly believed in? Or perhaps you've experienced a time when trust was broken, but you found a way to rebuild it. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories and insights. And if this tale of love, redemption, and resilience resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story. Your support means the world, and there are so many more adventures to share with you. Until next time, thank you for being a part of this journey. See you in the next story.